you.
Here, yes.
Yes, good, it's all working. So tell us a little bit about Herbie before we get into Herbie's story. How did he come into to live with you and Jill?
It's a story that doesn't reflect terribly well on us, to be honest, because our daughter left home to go to university, and we basically replaced her. So we got Herbie. I mean, within, I think, a month and a half of her going to Manchester, Herbie arrived, and has never left. And he is now in his dotage. He's 13 and a half years old. Spends a lot of time sleeping, reflecting on a life of supreme disappointment.
I would say that's a bit rough on Herbie to say he's had a disappointing life.
Well, sort of everything that he worked for turned out to be didn't really work out. I mean, his first job...
can you just explain how he got that first job? I mean, was there an element of nepotism?
Absolutely. I mean, this
By the
book
way,
is...
what kind
this
of dog
book is
is
a
Herbie?
real...
Sorry.
He's a cockapoo.
Fine. So going back to how did he get his first job?
Well, I mean, it was nepotism because that's the way Westminster works, obviously. We were out on the common, or he was taking us for a walk, and he bumped into Sadiq Khan's Labrador, Nova. And Nova said to him, "Do you know that Ed Miliband is looking for a special advisor?"
Yeah.
And up until that point, Herbie had never really thought about having a career. But at that point, he decided that actually life with me and my wife Jill was a bit boring. And he wanted more. He didn't just want to be a dog who went for a walk and lay down and slept. He kind of wanted more than that. So he went off for his first job. He applied to Ed Miliband. Herbie can master email, WhatsApp, and as you would expect. And Ed Miliband, to his credit, invited him for an interview.
Was Herbie really nervous?
I don't think he was, because I think that he didn't realize quite how big the job was going to be before he took it on. And Ed Miliband interviewed him. It was going very well. And then Ed Miliband said, "Just one thing, I've got to know, can you drive?" And he had to say, "I'm a dog. My paws don't hit the pedals." But we kind of got around that, and all was well. Except it wasn't, because Herbie was taken on in 2014 at the tail end of the coalition, and when we knew there was going to be a general election in 2015, because back then there was something called the Fixed Term Parliament Act that we all thought, yeah, this is going to revolutionize British politics. We're now only going to get a general election every 5 years. And back then, that actually meant it. Yeah. In the tail end of 2014, no one went up to David Cameron and said, "When are you going to have an election?" Now, it's the first question every interviewer asks the Prime Minister.
But going back to Herbie's first job, I mean, what were his duties with Ed?
Well, he was to try and get him to be more presentable.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really tough job.
Yeah, and to try and get him to be electable. That's
even tougher.
Yeah, well, it was really tough. And he got sidelined because he told Ed a few truths that he had to kind of wise up a bit and not be so clumsy.
What did Herbie think about the Ed stone, that famous forgotten piece of stone?
Ed, I mean, Herbie had no idea that this was going on. This was actually part of when Herbie was sidelined by various other spads who didn't think Ed having a dog as a spad was a good look.
Yeah, but also they were jealous, weren't they, of his access?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, they were jealous, but I mean, it was also very much, they just couldn't get their head round, and they wanted to, and so they came up with the Ed Stone. I mean, can you remember, do you remember the Ed Stone? It was the most daft thing. So Ed woke up, I mean, on a Sunday morning, we all woke up to the news that Ed was sort of down on the south coast somewhere, and he had the sort of 10 Commandments sort of etched into a giant piece of stone. And there's, you know, the first one was, I must try and not screw up, you know, and it sort of got lamer and lamer and lamer. So, I mean, Herbie's first job in politics ended, obviously, when...
That happened.
Well, with the general election of May 2015, because he was out of a job.
But he then came back to number 10 with Cameron, didn't he? I mean, that was quite a flight of political allegiance and, you know, definitely political skill, I would have thought.
Well, it was also a bit of happenstance as well. I mean, because by this stage, David Cameron, much to everyone's, including Dave's surprise, was in number 10. And he had sort of promised a Brexit referendum. Yeah. And Dave realised that he actually had no one on his team with any contacts with Labour. So Herbie was recruited as Director of Purpose brackets Labour. And his job was to try and get Jeremy Corbyn excited about, you know, staying in the EU.
Well, it was a tough call for Herbie.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is why I say that Herbie's career has been one of disappointment. His first job obviously was with Ed Miliband. That went sort of tits up. And then he was supposed to get Jeremy Corbyn to give even one speech in which he sounded enthusiastic about staying in the EU. And Corbyn just couldn't do it. I mean, for a long time, you know, Herbie would send emails to Seamus Milne, who was Jeremy Corbyn's head of comms, and they just wouldn't reply. And there was nothing. So for a long time, Herbie's job in number 10 was to literally send one email a week. And if you want to know why we lost the referendum, this is sort of why. Because there was this element of complacency going on. And Corbyn eventually did one speech. And, I mean, you remember at the time, the Labour Party had voted as a party that they were in favour of staying within the EU. But Corbyn was an old trot, really, and he loathed the EU. He kind of saw it as a sort of globalist international conspiracy. And so when he was called upon to make this great speech, he couldn't do it. He just sort of muttered a few words and then disappeared.
But Herbie gave quite a lot of advice to Seamus, didn't he, at that instance, about what he should be saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, Herbie did remind him that, this was Labour Party policy, but Seamus wasn't terribly interested, I'm afraid.
Was Herbie surprised that Cameron just stood down the morning after?
Well, sort of yes and no. I mean, it's of a piece, really, because, Herbie is frequently asked, what is the worst PM that you've served under?
I was going to ask that question, actually, yes.
And David Cameron generally takes we've had some shockers, let's face it. But David Cameron is where it all starts, really, because David Cameron was elected in 2015. I mean, to his surprise, he had no idea. And so he had to try and assuage the sort of Eurosceptics in his own parties. He'd promised this referendum, and he'd never really thought about what he needed to do. And there was just this kind of complacency throughout the referendum.
And then Herbie finds himself, I know we're jumping ahead here now, but I mean, Herbie then finds himself in number 10 with Johnson, doesn't he?
Yes.
Somehow. I mean, this is...
Well, yeah,
and then
that's as much as... he was in number... He was twice in number 10 with Boris. I mean, the first time with Boris Johnson, he was recruited because dogs can't get COVID. And they needed somebody... Steady, who wasn't going to take time off. And
I mean, it seems a very good idea.
And it seems very new. But unfortunately, he fell out with Dominic Cummings. And Dominic Cummings was famously sacked Herbie with the immortal words, "Fuck off, you fucking fucktard."
But one of the good things that happened to Herbie in that time was that he chummed up with Larry and indeed with Dylan the dog. I mean, and I personally had never seen that side of Dylan's character, which was a dog struggling against the odds.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was. I mean, initially I was surprised too, because I automatically assumed that any dog of Boris Johnson's just had to be hateful. I mean, there is no other word for it, kind of spoilt, And actually, I kind of realized through Herbie that what it was like for Dylan to have abusive parents.
I mean, they had their triumph, though, didn't they? That when they pulled off the wheeze in Kabul. Oh
yeah, well, I mean, this is Herbie's greatest ever achievement. And I mean, he needed them, to be honest. And
how did he swing it?
Well, it was because everyone in number 10 weren't really it was during the kind of retreat when the Taliban were taking over back in Afghanistan, and we were trying to do the airlifts from Kabul, and nobody was answering the phones. So Herbie and Dylan and Larry just organised an airlift of cats and dogs.
It's really brilliant when you look at it from that point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah. and sorry. So we're running out of time, but I have to ask you two more questions. What was Herbie's view of Truss?
Well, to be honest, he was a bit disappointed that she only lasted 49 days.
Well, because it was so much fun.
Because she was so much fun.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Herbie was at Balmoral when the Queen died.
I know. That's very moving, that he has that long conversation with her.
Yeah, and he got the inside story. And, I mean, we now know what the Queen's last words to Liz Truss were. "Can you shut the door on the way out, please?" And that Liz Truss effectively killed the Queen. Because, I mean, the Queen, after Liz Truss left, she sat down with the corgis and with Herbie and said, "Do you know what? My first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill. And do you know what? I've sat through Boris Johnson, and now I've got Liz Truss. I'm going to die. I might as well. Life is just too pointless to go on. I've had enough."
They were good, those corgis, weren't they? They were real friends of Herbie's.
Yeah.
Okay. So, final questions. I think we're up to time. What is? I mean, I'd like to ask Herbie directly. Okay, if you can, as a dog, what does he think of this lot, and would he take a job, either in number 10 or number 11, or indeed back with Ed Miliband at Department of Energy. Would he be up for them? I know he's 13 and a half, but he's pretty skilled.
I personally don't think so. I think sort of Herbie has done his bit for the nation. And to be honest, he's really pissed off with me because he thinks I've trivialized his life.
Ah.
And he hasn't yet forgiven me for that.
What are you going to do to make it up to him?
I give him dog chews. Every day I make him sit down and wait for his dog chews, which is meant to help his arthritis.
Wow. But would he go back and work for any of them? What does he think of them? He must be following politics because he's so politically tuned in.
He would quite like to be on the plane with Keir Starmer on Wednesday.
To Washington.
To Washington.
Good for Herbie. I mean, we could go on, but you're going to have to read the book, I think.
Well, thank
John,
you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.